Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday Build. This is episode 1.6, and today we're going to be talking about the topic, the calm imperative, plus sonic mood manipulation / cultivation, physiology, and high performance. We're going to be featuring today a singer called LP, meditation, breathing, sound, and a cup of tea. So my name is Brittany Hernandez. If you don't know me already, my friend M calls me B, and my dad and my uncle call me Peanut Brittle. I'm from San Diego, but I'm based out of London, and I previously served in the United States military. I'm also a lawyer. I focused on intellectual property and entertainment law in California, and then I moved to London to do a master's degree in international film business. After which I became the business development executive at a legal tech startup called Vala, based out of Scotland. After which I worked as a professional gavel expert with Gig Law, where I created automation tools and different legal products and apps for other lawyers. After which I was invited by Gavel to become their global ambassador to law schools, which I'm really excited about and love my role with them. And through that program, I'm the program director and senior instructor for the Law Students in Legal Tech Access to Justice program or fellowship, which just kicked off today, our 4th week. And we are taking rolling admission. So if you're interested in joining us, if you are a current law student, a recent graduate within 1 year, or a participant of an incubator program, please do join us. We have rolling admissions until March 28th. I'm also the creator and host of the Lightning Talk for Legal Innovators series in partnership with Gavel, as well as this series, the Wednesday Build. And I'm the creator of a free interactive digital magazine called Code Word Hex, which comes out with new issues every Tuesday. And I'm the founder, course creator, and senior instructor of Chromium Academy, where I have Gavel certification courses on software and Airtable, and more. So let's get into it. For today, we're going to go over a few things. As you saw with the title for today's talk, I'm going over this idea of calm and physiology and how you can manipulate or cultivate different moods and energies using different tools in order to have sustained peak performance. So we'll talk about things like accessing the muse through mood, and then we'll talk about flow states, and we'll talk about physiology and how that affects all of these different pieces and how they work together. So I really like this artist who she's a singer, songwriter extraordinaire. Her name is LP. So in an interview that she did where she's talking about her album that I really like called Lost on You, she says, "I'm a mood cultivator. I feel like that's the space that I write a song from. It became like a skill, like a school almost, of how to deal with accessing the muse when you don't feel like it." So when we talk about things like peak performance and sustained healthy peak performance, what we're really talking about is the ability to access your creative energy, which you could call your muse, access your inspiration, access your higher creative self-expression and functions, and your higher motor skills, you could say, and all of your brain's capacity and functions, even when you don't feel like doing that, where it becomes more of either like a habit or a ritual to get into or out of what's called flow, and how to do that in a way that is a little bit more systematic, or utilizing different tools that you can use in order to tap into your muse through your ability to cultivate a mood, even if you don't feel like it at the time. So the interview that I'm quoting is actually this one here. And in this one, the interview is just asking her, how much do you draw from your own life? And she kind of talks a little bit about how she draws from her own life a lot, but it's really more about how she's able to tap into her ability to cultivate a skill of accessing her muse even when she doesn't feel like it. So I just really like this quote, and it really inspired this whole talk today about the calm imperative and sonic mood manipulation and cultivation, and how you can, harness different aspects of the way that your body functions and it reacts to different stimuli in order to get into or out of flow and transition in those different states. So we'll talk first, if we go back to our agenda, we'll talk first about, so we've talked just a little bit about mood, but we want to talk a little bit next about flow. So there's this great article on Medium by Jerry Rumor, who has this article called How to Reach Flow State Using 10 Flow State Triggers. And I really like this because it tracks well with a book I really like called Atomic Habits by James Clear. So let's go into that just a tiny bit, because it is kind of this habitual sort of thing to kind of go into and out of a state of flow. So when we think about, this is Atomic Habits here. Let me show you image. So if we think about Atomic Habits, what it's talking about is this idea of a cue, a craving, a response, and a reward. And I like to think about this a lot, and I institute a lot of what is from Atomic Habits into my own personal life. And it really, really transformed the way that I approach everything that I do. And it helped me to lose a bunch of weight, make more money, wake up earlier, just have an overall happier, healthier life, and to be more productive in a way that's still healthy. So when we talk about triggers, we're kind of talking about the same thing that you would say as cues. So you can kind of conceptualize them in a similar way. So when we're talking about our ability to sustain peak performance, we're talking about that ability to tap or to cultivate a mood that puts us into a flow state in which we can access all of the different parts of our genius zone that we've talked about previously, so that we can create from a place of inspiration rather than an abundance rather than from lack. So in this article, he talks about this idea of, think about the last time you were engaged in activity and you simply lost track of time. That's when you're in that flow state or in performing activities that are within your personal genius zone. You are focused like a ninja, you felt amazing, and it seemed as if there was nothing else on this planet besides you and your activity. That is what we call a flow state. So it's a state of mind where you are extremely productive and also feel good. So you are focused on what you're doing, you're able to produce a certain result, you're able to perform at a high level, but you also don't feel drained necessarily. You don't have to force yourself to work hard. It seems like it's just flowing. That's why they call it flow, as if you're flowing through your work. So he talks about how this getting into a flow state is not something that just happens by accident, and that you can put yourself in a flow state proactively, similar to what LP was talking about, where she's saying, I cultivate the mood where I can access my muse, and it's like a skill, like a school, as she says. You just need to know what triggers you to get into that flow state, and that's what he talks about in this particular article. So he talks about the flow state being a happy state. So he says, most people assume that relaxation makes them happy. They want to work less and spend more time in the hammock. However, he quotes Mihaly here by saying, studies revealed that most people have this particular insight wrong. And the best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times, but moments usually occur. The best moments usually occur if a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. So that's that kind of flow state that we want to live in, where we're not just relaxing, but we're actually feeling happy and productive when we are voluntarily putting ourselves into an effort that allows us to accomplish something that's difficult and challenging, but not so challenging that we feel like we need to give up. So there's a sweet spot there, that sort of Goldilocks zone of your flow state, where it's not too challenging, not too easy, but just right. So this article kind of goes on to talk about how people are most happy when they're in their state of flow and they're fully immersed, which is going to be kind of a broader point here, where one of the first things that he has you do or talks about is eliminating all external distractions. So in order to get into a state of flow, and I've heard this so many different times as well about distractions, is that when you get interrupted, when you're in a state of flow, it takes like a certain number of minutes to get back that you lose because you're trying to get back to where you were, the same state of flow you were before. So for his flow trigger, state trigger number 1, he says, eliminate all distractions. So it says that in order to reach a flow state, you must eliminate all external distractions. Every time you get pulled off your focus, you will taken further away from your flow state. Only when you can focus with undivided attention for at least 10 to 15 minutes can you get into a flow state. So I love that because what I do, what I do is have a golden hour in the morning for 1 hour where I wake up at 5:30. I do some gratitude and sort of meditation for 10 minutes. Then I get out of bed at 5:40. I brush my teeth and go to the bathroom and brush my hair and put on my clothes for the next activity, which would be the one setting myself up for the one after my golden hour, which is an exercise or workout time. So, but during that golden hour, I'm focused deeply on whatever the most important thing is for that day. And I don't look at my phone, and I'm very protective of that hour and make sure, because sometimes that is the only hour that I was able to have no distractions. And I pick that time from 6 to 7 a.m. my time because it's nighttime for people in the US and it's super early in the morning for people who are in the UK with me. And it's later in the afternoon for people who are, let's say, in Australia or in China or whatever else. So it's kind of a really nice time of the day when I'm not getting a ton of emails and I'm not getting pinged on Slack a ton, and I can just have a bit of quiet because and I always have my phone in do not disturb unless I'm specifically expecting a call or have certain alarms to trigger a next action. So when we talk about mood and we talk about flow and we talk about how we can utilize our physiology and understand our physiology in a way that allows us to achieve high performance, we really need to think about the way that external distractions can interrupt our flow state and our ability to perform at a very high level, which is why I ended up doing that institution of a golden hour every morning from 6 to 7. So find a time in your day that you can have no distractions, where it's not, you don't pick a time that is when everyone needs you, so that you can have that really good quiet time, and disable all of your alerts on your notifications, close all of your different email tabs, and focus specifically on what it is you're doing. And one of the things too is around like sort of mental space and clutter. So you have your, he kind of talks about this idea of eliminating external distractions as well as internal distractions. So he goes into this next part about the flow state trigger number 2, eliminate internal distractions, because you can have a perfect environment of your external environment where nobody's actually pinging you. Like there's no sound alerts, there's no emails coming in, there's no Slack messages coming in, but you have so much internal noise and distractions that you're not able to achieve that state of flow. So he says, whenever you experience stress or have too much on your mind, it will be incredibly hard to keep your mind focused on your task at hand, and therefore it will be impossible to reach a flow state. If this happens to you, he recommends 2 things: journaling every morning and evening, and daily meditation for at least 10 minutes. And meditation is definitely one of the things that affects your physiology anyway, that we'll go to in that particular section. But the point of these different practices is to help you clear your mind and limit your mind wandering, and so you can control your thoughts better. So I really love that he points that out as well. So one of the things I was going to point out really quickly about external, internal environments and reducing mental overload so that you can get into your flow state, is if you notice even just the desktop, the way that I set up my desktop is where I have a single folder. So anytime I open up my computer, I don't see a bunch of things that I feel are calling to me that I would feel overwhelmed just from the jump. Just from the start of opening my computer, I don't want to feel overwhelmed by what I see. I want to see a clean environment that makes me feel like I'm starting from a fresh slate. I also turn my all of my devices off except for one phone, which has my alarm for the morning. Besides, so I have two alarms, one that goes off that's like a sunrise lamp that goes off at 5:30, and then I have one on my phone that goes off at 5:40 that plays a song that I really like. And actually to that point, there is let's say if you wanted to try to wake up a little bit earlier and kind of practice having a golden hour in the morning. I love Mel Robbins, who has a great book called The 5-Second Rule. And I think it's in this particular book, if I'm not mistaken, where she talks about how you should wake up 30 minutes earlier than you normally do. And when your alarm goes off, instead of like snoozing or whatever, that you rip the covers off and just like jump out of bed and start your day. And I personally, like, that might work for her and for a lot of other people. But one recommendation that I would have, as far as, especially as it relates to mood and happiness and your ability to get inside and out of, to transition into and out of states of flow, is that you wake up happy and content. So what I actually do is my gift to myself for waking up early and having my alarm go off and having the intention and the practice of waking up early is that I have my sunrise lamp, kind of do an imitation sunrise that has lovely music playing at 5:30. Then I will wake up, turn my light on, turn off the alarm, and then allow myself to lay down for 10 minutes while I practice Skyvis, which is a practice of, so I close my eyes and I do a practice of gratitude, abundance, intention, visualization, affirmation, and then I smile to wake up in a state of feeling love, abundance, fulfillment, gratitude. So instead of going to this really harsh start and then just feeling throughout the whole day that I'm just being a bully to myself, I wake up and I want to feel like happy and content and go into that day with a mood of positive energy that makes me feel like I was able to give myself the gift of rest for another 10 minutes, and then my second alarm goes off. So that's something you might try if you'd like to. So let's talk next about the flow state trigger number 3. So in this part, Jerry talks about work at your biological peak time. I really like this as well because he talks about how getting into a flow state is hard if you're low on energy. You need to have the willpower to focus on just one thing and not get distracted along the way. Tapping into your willpower and attention is energy draining. So you absolutely need to do it when your mind is sharp and energized. And there's actually a book called The Productivity Project. Where is it? The T Project. Here we go. This one is this book, The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. So in this book, he talks about this a little bit, and he talks about tracking your energy. So he kind of has this process of, and I actually think about it a lot because he like tells you to pay attention to your like kind of peaks and valleys in your energy, either by tracking them. I like to use Clockify because it kind of also shows you a visual representation of when you actually work every single day and what time blocks you tend to work most based on your inputs. And so you can kind of see like, oh, my productivity is really high in the morning and then dips in the afternoon. And then I get a second wind toward the end of the day. For some people, it's the opposite. They're really sluggish in the morning and it takes some time to sort of ramp up. So understanding your energy and understanding how to harness your different bodily, like your physiological, biological peak time is really important, because if you try to get in a state of flow when you're tired and your energy is super drained, it will constantly feel like an uphill battle and you're always fighting distractions, and it's easier to sort of like have your willpower essentially runs out. So that's why you want to try to get into a state of flow when your energy is the highest, as you could see from the productivity project as well. Some people, he says, I recommend you use your mornings to get into a flow state. That's because you make a lot of decisions throughout the day. And then if you're trying to get into flow at the end of the day, all of your willpower and your decision-making power is used up. But for some people, the morning time is not the best time for them. And actually it's after everyone goes to sleep and they finally get some time alone, if they have, let's say, kids or a partner or whatever else. And then when we get into next, this flow state trigger 4, we can kind of talk a little bit more deeply about sonic mood manipulation and cultivation, and how you can use sound and how that affects your physiology, which is such an interesting thing to think about. So he talks about how music can actually help you become highly focused and therefore highly productive. So you can utilize sound and music in order to get into flow state or to transition out of flow state, so you can kind of snap and bring your mind to a new state. So when you listen to music on repeat or a repetitive type of music such as techno, classical music, or trance, it's easier to reach a state of flow. So it also talks about how you use that, so through which medium. So he talks about how using earbuds, it will help you block more external distractions, chatter, or sort of noise from outside, and also keeps your internal distractions at a minimum. And then he says that he notices that music, especially techno, keeps his mind in check and prevents him from wandering off. So actually what I use is I have a subscription to Apple Music. And you can see, so there's a couple that I really like that I'll share that helped me to get into a state of flow. And I was using this one, Pure Calm, a lot when I was working at Gig Law, because it helps to reduce my heart rate and helps me to just kind of trigger the fact that I'm working on deep focus work. It doesn't have lyrics, so it's not distracting from a lyric perspective, and just has like such beautiful, moving music that I just really love. So Pure Calm is one of the playlists that you can get from Apple Music. Another one I really like is Pure Focus. Another one is Lo-Fi Sunday. So all of these different ones are really great for getting you sort of into that mood of doing deep work where you don't have to listen to particular lyrics. The one that I love the most these days is one called From Home, which is an album by Vivian Roost, which has some of the most beautiful piano music I've ever heard. And it actually just makes me feel like emotional and happy, and sort of like so many mixed emotions feeling listening to this. But I highly recommend this particular album as well to get into a flow state. But if you look at these different types of music, what you'll notice is that everyone will kind of have their own, but you'll find these sort of similarities as well. And I have this book that I got actually just from a random charity shop that is called How Music Works. And there is a very cool chapter, chapter 9, that is called The Self-Confident Major and the Emotional Minor, Mood and Music. So he talks about how the author of this book is John Powell, and it's How Music Works, the Science and Psychology of Beautiful Sounds from Beethoven to the Beatles and Beyond. And it comes with a cool CD where it talks about things like how to get different sounds from a guitar string. Can you guess what instrument this is? Why some notes clash and others get along together? Different ways to accompany a tune, ancient and modern scales. The horrible out of tune bamboo whistle, confident majors and emotional minors. how to bring tears to the eyes of the audience, and the magnificent drinking straw oboe. So the point of this is to just say that he talks about how there are a number of ways in which composers of symphonies, pop songs, and car rental jingles can establish or change the mood of a piece of music. Some of these moods effects rely on the animal responses of human beings, and some depend on a shared musical culture between the composer and the listener. So what I find interesting about that is this idea that there are biological, instinctual sort of animal responses to sound. And then there's also a shared musical culture where we've assigned collectively meaning to certain sounds or types of music. So he says, for example, when listening to music, we often find an increase in volume exciting. This excitement can prompt the usual physical reactions of increased heart rate and adrenaline production. This is because our subconscious links an increase in sound volume, people shouting, lions roaring, with possible danger. On the other hand, we associate slow violins accompanying a piano with romance. We do this simply because we have been taught to do so from film music and TV perfume commercials. In turn, we've taught our composers that they need to include some violins and piano stuff if they want us to start getting out the handkerchiefs. In this case, there's no reason for the link other than the assortment of cultural cliches that we're all familiar with. Banjos mean hillbillies and accordions mean Paris. When all is said and done, music is a form of entertainment. So it doesn't really matter if our emotional response is real adrenaline or learned cliches. So I think that's really interesting because he also talks about how we find the increases in speed, tempo, volume, and pitch exciting, and decreases in these have a calming effect. Anticipation is a good mood enhancer. So if the music is quietly repetitive, we expect something frightening or marvelous to happen soon, and the anticipation helps the dramatic effect. Music composed in major keys sound more self-confident and generally happier than music composed in minor keys. So I just find that really fascinating because we're talking a little bit like what we talked about last time, or maybe two episodes ago, around synesthesia and how we can have different senses cross with each other in different situations. So in this case, you have things like music crossing with things like mood and happiness. So I just find that really fascinating. And then what you can do with that is you could see with this sort of animal response, as well as learned cultural cliches, manipulate that or cultivate a mood utilizing these different techniques, as we've noted here, and as I've shared with you with the ones that I use myself. So when we talk about the physiological response, we kind of get into this conversation about stress, as well as the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So in this 2020 article by Harvard Health Publishing, they talk about chronic activation of a survival mechanism impairs health. So this talks about how a stressful situation, whether something environmental, such as a looming work deadline, or psychological, such as persistent worry about losing a job, can trigger a cascade of stress hormones that produce well-orchestrated physiological changes. A stressful incident can make the heart pound and breathing quicken, muscles tense, and beads of sweat appear. The combination of reactions of stress is also known as the fight or flight response because it evolved as a survival mechanism, which allowed people to quickly get away from life-threatening situations. So what happens though is that when this, sort of near instantaneous sequence of hormonal changes and physiological responses help someone to fight the threat or flee to safety, what happens though is that the body can also overreact to stressors that are not life-threatening, such as traffic jams, work pressure, or family difficulties, for example. And over the years, we've been able to see that when these reactions occur, they've also been linked to things like chronic stress and how that has a negative impact on your physical and psychological health. And so what's happening here is that the stress response begins in your brain And so when you confront an oncoming car or other type of danger, even if, as we saw earlier about like a looming work deadline or whatever, the eyes or ears or both send the information to the amygdala, which is an area of the brain that contributes to emotional processing. So then that interprets the images and the sounds, and when it perceives danger, it sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. So when you experience a stressful event, then that area contributes to that emotional processing, and then the signal gets sent out. And then what happens is your brain is communicating with the rest of your body throughout your nervous system to say that you either need to flee or fight or freeze. I think there's another one now, which is sort of like foul or something. Anyway, so we won't read all of this, obviously, but the point is that when we talk about trying to counter stress, and I just wanted to go into this a little tiny bit more here, which is that it's hard to put the brakes on stress. It's hard because there's constantly different triggers in our environment that are causing us to have chronic stress, which limits our ability to access the different parts of our brain, because your body is so focused on fighting the danger that it won't allow you to focus on something that would be more creative or something that would be like you need to be in your flow state. So here we talk about how what happens is when you have chronic low-level stress, even if it's just like an underlying hum of stress, then that keeps the axis activated, which is like a motor that's idling too high for too long. And after a while, it has the effect that it contributes to health problems associated with this chronic stress. So it can damage blood vessels and arteries, increasing blood pressure and raising the risk of heart attacks and strokes. So we need to be able to find ways to create physiological changes that reduce and calm our bodies down from all of this chronic stress. And we need to turn off the signal that there's danger. So what people can do are things like relaxation. So in this particular case, there's a way to learn how to counter by using a combination of approaches that elicit the relaxation response. So this kind of goes to that calm imperative. This includes things like deep abdominal breathing, focus on a soothing word such as peace or calm, visualization of tranquil scenes or repetitive prayer, yoga, and Tai Chi. So isn't that interesting? So you have a Dr. Herbert Benson, who's the director emeritus of the Benson Henry Institute for Mind and Body Medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital, talking about things like breathing, soothing words, visualization of tranquil scenes, repetitive prayer, yoga, and Tai Chi as means of reducing the fight or flight response to the point where we can actually calm our nervous system down to the point where we can actually access our higher brain functions. So I just find this really interesting. And if we go further, you can see that when people have done different research about how to reduce this type of stress, they've shown that that these results, like the results of these different techniques of repetitive prayer and yoga, that they're worth trying. And also, they give an example here of the researchers at the hospital that this doctor works at. They conducted a double-blind randomized controlled trial of 122 patients that had hypertension that were aged 55 and older, and then half were assigned to do this sort of relaxation response training, and the other were to just receive information about blood pressure control. After 8 weeks, 34 of the people who practiced the relaxation response, more than half, achieved a systolic blood pressure reduction of more than 5 millimeters, or we can just interpret this as needed from a medical standpoint, and were therefore eligible for the next phase of the study, in which they could reduce levels of blood pressure medication they were taking. So isn't that amazing? So during that second phase, 50% were able to eliminate at least one blood pressure medication, which was more than the control group, who only had received information about blood pressure control, where only 19% eliminated their medication. So we also see a suggestion for physical activity. So we have this idea of relaxation techniques that involve sort of slow movement, abdominal breathing, soothing words, prayer, yoga, and things like that. But we also see a more engaged movement. So people can use exercise to stifle the buildup of stress in several ways. So they talk about how a brisk walk can work, which not only deepens your breathing, which goes back to utilizing your breath work in order to reduce stress, but also helps to relieve muscle tension. For some reason, I notice that whenever I start to get stressed when I'm doing a particularly difficult build or working on a particularly difficult logical problem, my right back of my hamstring likes to tense up. So I have to do a lot of mindfulness training and meditation and sort of body awareness to understand how to relax my body in a way that will soothe myself so I can focus and get into my flow state without causing sort of muscle tension in different parts of my body. So they talk more further about movement therapy such as yoga, Tai Chi, and Qigong, and combining the fluid movements with deep breathing and mental focus, all of which can induce calm. So this is really, really why I'm talking about the calm imperative. You must make your body calm in order to achieve this higher state of performance. They also go into things like social support, which is interesting, community, confidants, friends, acquaintances, coworkers, relatives, spouses, and companions. They all provide this life-enhancing social net that allow you to increase your longevity and continue to contribute to a higher or elevated mood, which would help you to get into a state of flow. So if we go a little bit deeper into this idea of the fight or flight response versus what is called the parasympathetic system. So we want to achieve a state of a parasympathetic system rather than a sympathetic system, because the sympathetic system controls the fight or flight response, whereas the parasympathetic nervous system regulates the rest and digest function. So it allows your controls the basic bodily functions while one is sitting quietly reading a book, for example, versus when you're running away from a lion. So let's talk a little bit more about breathing. So we saw, as we've gone throughout these different articles so far, that breathing benefits have been mentioned a couple of times now. So let's go deeper into this notion of the benefits of deep breathing in order to achieve a state of calm, which allows you to then achieve a state of sustained peak and healthy performance. So they talk a little bit about different types of breathing. It sounds so weird to me, actually, that that we can change our physiological state just by something so free and accessible and easy not for everyone. Not everyone can breathe deeply or well if they have, some kind of health issue. But for most of us, we're able to breathe deeply for free without an oxygen tank or anything else, and provide sustaining breath that allows us to change our physiological state, which allows us to enter different states of flow and allows us to access different functions of our brain so that we can solve complex problems. So they talk about how mental health professionals and yogis alike will recommend deep breathing. And also you can see doctors from Massachusetts General Hospital because of the amazing ways it can benefit your mental health, not just your respiratory system. So it goes back to that mental health, mood, fighting chronic stress. So they talk about how we take more than 8 million breaths per year. So why is it so hard to get a deep one? And what is it? And so they go kind of through different types of breath, as I mentioned. So there are 4 different types of breathing. And I wanted to mention too that I believe it's the Wim Hof method of breathing exercises. So Wim Hof is quite well known for his feats of incredible endurance in many different fields of just insane levels of temperature, sort of like really, really hot temperatures and really, really cold temperatures, where he'll sit, for example, in just shorts in freezing cold. And it's his ability to regulate and control his nervous system and his physiology to not get hypothermia. So he says in his method here, why we breathe, regulated by the autonomic nervous system, inhaling oxygen is an unconscious process. Fortunately, it's an unconscious praxis. Otherwise, we simply wouldn't have a break, as we'd have to deal with it incessantly. The amount of oxygen that we inhale through our breathing influences the amount of energy that is released into our body cells. On a molecular level, this progresses via various chemical and physiological processes. Breathing is the easiest and most instrumental part of the autonomic nervous system to control and navigate. In fact, the way that you breathe strongly affects chemical and physiological activities in your body. Throughout the years, Wim Hof has developed special breathing exercises that keep his body in optimal condition and in complete control in the most extreme conditions. So he gives you these different types, so 30 to 40 deep breaths, then hold, recovery breath, etc. And the breathing bubble. There's also things like box breathing and all these different things. So there's also a book that's really good called Breathe to Perform that I like. So I saw this on, let's see, it was an ebook site. Let's see, I think it's a free one here. Yeah. So I would recommend this. It was really interesting. The reason being that he kind of talks about how simple breathing exercises that you can use to reduce stress, improve energy, and peak athletic performance. So he had this part in this book that's really fascinating, where he talks about how the way that you breathe actually is influenced by and does influence your actual body structure, like how your body holds up. Because if you have, for example, like an overdeveloped muscle on one side versus another, and you have some imbalances in your body, then when you breathe, you're actually like expanding your ribs or not. So you would influence how expansive your body is or how constricted your body is based on how you generally breathe and fill up the internal parts of your body and move your organs around, which I just thought was so fascinating. I never even thought about it before. But he has some really great, the author here, David Bidler, has some really fascinating things. So I highly recommend this book as well. I was just going to find where I was. Okay, here. Anyway, so he goes over also some different breathing exercises to reduce stress and increase calm in your life. And he is like an ultra marathon like runner who does like insane distances. But he teaches you about how your breath is connected to your performance, which is really, really interesting. So this article talks about how there are 4 types of breathing. We have this particular one where you have the one that you're doing right now, which is when you're not thinking about it. It's not conscious breathing, it's quiet breathing. So both the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles must contract. When we do diaphragmatic breathing, which is also known as deep breathing, the diaphragm muscles must contract in this type of respiration. And when the muscle contracts, you breathe passively, breath passively leaves the lungs rather than forcefully. Then you have costal breathing. So this type of breathing, also known as shallow breathing, uses your intercostal muscles, the muscles between your ribs. So as the muscles relax, the air leaves your lungs. If you're stressed, you may be doing this type of breathing right now, or even unconsciously holding your breath. And then you have this last one, also known as forced breathing. Both inhalation and exhalation are active rather than passive due to muscle contractions. So it kind of goes later now into the different benefits. So we've talked a lot about all the different benefits so far of controlling your breathing and doing breathing exercises. But here are some that you can see here, which are things like helping with anxiety, depression, managing stress, improving focus, getting better sleep, and having faster recovery from exercise or exertion. And we talked a little bit already about why breathing affects your physiology, but I think there's a good explanation in this article where they say, you may be wondering why slow breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, also called the rest and digest system. Its job is to conserve energy and to be used for bodily processes such as digestion and urination. It also activates the vagus nerve, which is like the boss of the parasympathetic nervous system, overseeing things like mood, digestion, and heart rate. It will also send more oxygen to your brain and other organs. So that is what we've been talking about so far. We've talked about the parasympathetic nervous system. We've talked about the rest and digest system. We've talked about mood. We've talked about all of these different things. So then they go into sort of how to, which is good. They have different practices you can try here. So when we talk about this idea of getting into a flow state, being able to manipulate or cultivate a mood, and being able to control our peak performance through being able to transition inside and into and out of a flow state, we've seen these different types of triggers that we can use, including things like music, breathing, meditation, and so on. He goes on, the author of this particular article goes on to talk about different other flow state triggers, such as working on one very specific task. Also, this Goldilocks zone that we talked about, where the task must be challenging enough, but not too challenging. And you can see if a task is too easy, you'll get bored quickly and your mind will wander and you won't reach a state of flow. However, if a task is too hard, you'll likely get overwhelmed and you won't be able to achieve that subconscious level that is necessary for the flow state. So that is kind of, I think, a great model of flow as it's related to challenge and ability. So we have high versus low in challenge and low to high for ability. So we have boredom, depressed and contented, relaxation, confident and contented, control, happy and confident, flow, focused and happy, arousal, alert and focused, anxiety, stressed and alert, worry, sad and stressed, and apathy, sad and depressed. So we can just see how much all of these things are linked together, how hard something is, and or how challenging something is versus our ability can affect our ability to enter into a flow state. It also goes into talking about having a clear outcome or goal. But what I think is really interesting is this next one, trigger 8, on strategically consuming caffeine. I personally don't drink caffeine, but what I think is interesting about this is more relevant to physiology and cultivating mood and states of flow through sort of like hacking our biology, understanding it first and then hacking it. So he says here, according to Chris Bailey, author of Hyperfocus, who we also saw, I think was also the Productivity Project. Chris Bailey here, the same person who wrote the Productivity Project. He wrote another one called Hyperfocus. He says consuming caffeine strategically can provide a serious productivity and focus boost. If you consume up to 200 milligrams of caffeine, about 2 cups of coffee, it has proven that you can focus more intensely, work for longer without giving up, and have a better short-term memory and help you in a flow state. But if you have too much or more than that, then the effects start to diminish. So what I think, like I said, is interesting, is interesting about this particular point about coffee or caffeine is actually more, like I said, about, and even if we go into trigger 9 as well, about being hydrated. And he talks about like the overlooked way is for improving performance of your brain is to drink enough water. These are sort of nutrition and sort of like there's actually a guy who is, let's see, he's a let me just think about what's his name again. Nutrition, let me just see. And psychology. There's a guy who wrote a book and it has a TED Talk. Nutritional psychology. It's this idea that what you eat is connected to, let me see if I can find it. Drew Ramsey, I think it's this one. Let me double check. Yeah. This guy's great. So his name is Drew Ramsey, and I think he has a book as well. Let me double check. Yeah. So he's great. He's also quite funny as well. So he has a book called Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, Nourish Your Way to Better Mental Health in 6 Weeks. And also this other one, Eat Complete, the 21 nutrients that fuel brain power, boost weight loss, and transform your health. So he talks a lot, especially in this TED Talk, about how food affects your mental health. He talks about the benefits of things like oysters and certain types of nuts and things like kale and whatever else. But he kind of talks mostly about like just this idea that you can utilize the nutrients of different foods to influence your mood and to influence your mental health and combat things like anxiety and depression. What I think is just interesting about this whole conversation that we're having right now has to do with the idea of biohacking and the fact that we are chemistry, like we are bodies that are made up of different elements and different things like water, and we're breathing, we're conducting sort of energy and having different things fire within our bodies at all times, which is something that we can understand. And once we understand it, we can control parts of it. Obviously, we can't control sort of everything, but we can understand how to sort of put certain things into our bodies or intake certain things as far as like music or certain breathing practices that we can then use in order to cultivate a state of flow and to have a sustained level of peak performance. So we talk here about water, and then his last one here is about creating a mental cue. So the last flow state trigger is to create a mental cue for yourself to enter flow state. In other words, do something special each time before you sit down to go into flow state. This kind of goes back to what we talked about atomic habits, about a cue, craving, response, and reward, and having that be something that you do the same way each time, sort of like a ritual. So for example, he says, whether it's repeating a special sentence or affirmation, taking a few deep breaths, there's that breath again, or anything else, do that exact same thing each time you want to get into a flow state. Over time, it allows this to be a mental cue for your brain, so that every time you follow your cue, you're telling your brain it's time to go into a flow state now. So that's why I actually have my golden hour at the same time every day, which is part of the ritual and the cue. I have it to where I perform that cue in the same environment every single time. I have the same sort of music playing at certain intervals in order to trigger my mind to say I'm going into a flow state now, and so on. So he says that like it sounds weird, but it really works, and I agree. And he says like our behavior is largely based on neuro associations, and by creating a mental cue for getting into flow state, you're essentially creating a new neuro association. All in all, over time, you're making it easier for yourself to get into a state of flow, which goes back all the way to the beginning of this conversation where we talked about what LP was saying about her ability to cultivate her mood. And let's just review that particular quote one last time, where she says, I'm a mood cultivator. I feel like that's the space that I write a song from. It became like a skill, like a school almost, of how to deal with accessing the muse when you don't feel like it. So overall, that's what I wanted to have this particular Wednesday Build episode be about, is just knowing and understanding that you have the ability within yourself for free to be able to breathe your way into a state of flow, to be able to meditate your way into a state of flow, to be able to listen to certain types of particular sounds, chords, and music to allow yourself to become into a state of flow. And also that you could even eat or drink your way into a state of flow by understanding your physiology and how that interacts with your ability to fight things like depression and anxiety, chronic stress, and so on. If you have any questions, please do reach out to me. I'm always happy to connect with you. And as far as announcements go, I'll move this around a little bit. I do this series called the Wednesday Build every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. I also put out new issues of my digital magic magazine called Code Word Hex every Tuesday. I have courses through my academy called Cormam Academy, which has things on software and Airtable, as well as Scabble. And I'm currently the program director and senior instructor for the Law Students in Legal Tech Access to Justice Fellowship that I mentioned, where we're learning about so many different things. I'm teaching the students about things like sales funnels and CRMs, and also about how to use Gavel and things like Clio Grow, as well as so many other things. So if you're a current law student or recent grad within 1 year or participant of a legal incubator program, you can reach out to me, or you can find more information on the Gavel website. You can also join my global community by being a part of any of my courses on Cormam Academy, including the free ones. And then also there's a really active Slack group on Gavel, which I really highly recommend. So thank you so much for joining me today. Our next one will be on Wednesday, the 15th of February at the same time and place. And we're going to be going over something called generosity as a business strategy. Authentic generosity invites genuine loyalty. So I think this is something that I think about a lot. That's really interesting to me when I'm making a purchasing decision, especially when it comes to software. So I'm going to go over some of my different software tech tools that I use over other maybe more popular ones because of their strategy of generosity. And I'll also go into like the HubSpot flywheel versus traditional sales funnels and things like that. So if you would like to connect with me, please do. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, or feel free to email me at brittany@cormam.pro. If you'd like to get in touch with me about the Gavel Law School program, you can email me at brittany@gavel.io. And thank you so much for your time, especially those who are here with me live and those who are watching the recording. And I will see you next week.